got the lesson for today, as we mentioned, is from Mark's Gospel. And if these were all, if I could put red letter words, I should do this. I should put red letter words up on our slide so we can see that we have here even the very red letter words of Jesus. And kind of a long passage, since we only do one lesson, there's a lot of churches. My mom's Episcopal church does 4 lessons each Sunday. So I think if we get a nice, juicy gospel like this, we're going to share this whole gospel. We only got this one last lesson for the words of Jesus. But there's just one little part I'm going to focus on. Let's go through this together. And Jesus was at home, the scripture says, and the crowd came together again so that they could not even eat. And when his family heard it, they went out to restrain him, for people were saying, he has gone out of his mind. And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem says, he has Beelzebul, and by the ruler of the demons he cast out demons. And so he called out to them, and he spoke to them in parables, saying, how can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. And if Satan is risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but as it has come. But no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man. Then indeed the house can be plundered. Truly I tell you, people will be forgiven for their sins in whatever blasphemies they utter. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit can never have forgiveness, but is guilty of an eternal sin, for they had said, he has an unclean spirit. Now this is the part that I'm going to focus on today. It says, then his mother and his brothers came. Standing outside, they sent to him and called him. The crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, your mother and your brothers and your sisters are outside asking for you. And he replied, who are my mother and my brothers? And looking at those who sat around him, he said, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister. Amen. Thanks be to God this day. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This is the message that God has for us. I think it's amazing how sometimes the lectionary has a message. We come back from this trip and has a message that just touches us right where we need to be as a church. But there's a story about a man who went on one of these kinds of mission trips, and he was kind of like me. I didn't even know I was going on this trip until a month before the trip happened. So this guy was like that. He got caught into this trip. He didn't know he was going to Honduras. He didn't know he didn't know any Spanish. He didn't know anything about it. So he got down on the trip just like ours. And first thing that they were doing was they were going to a church service. And so they showed up all to the church service first thing, but the church was packed that day. And so he got separated from the group. He was just there. He got separated from the group. And the only seat he could find was a seat right up front. So he made the best of it. He got right up front and he sat down, and he didn't know any Spanish. So he didn't want to make a fool of himself. So he found the man sitting right next to him. He thought, I'm going to do exactly what this man does. And so when the man clapped, he clapped. When the man prayed, he prayed. When the man stood up, he stood up. And when the man sat down, he sat down. When they passed the communion and the man took the bread and the cup, he took the bread and the cup. He didn't understand anything they were saying. The preacher was preaching. He didn't understand the preaching. He could tell that it had turned to announcements, but he didn't understand. But, when the man clapped at the announcements next to him, he clapped. And then the preacher was real emphatic, and he said something he didn't understand. And the man next to him stood up, and he stood right up. And he realized the whole congregation went silent. And there was a couple of whispers he heard from the back. And he looked around, he noticed nobody else was standing up. And so he sat down in a sure enough hurry. Well, afterwards, they went through and they shook the pastor's hand going through the receiving line. And he got and he shook the pastor's hand, and the pastor says, well, it's pretty obvious that you don't know any Spanish. And the man says, was it that obvious? How could you tell? And the man says, well, I could tell especially when I announced that the Romero family had a new baby and when the new father pleased to stand up. But, and I hope I didn't do anything that embarrassing on this trip. I don't know. I pray, did I do anything that embarrassing on this trip? I don't know. But my son is shaking his head, yes. But that was my situation, right? As I said, I went on this trip. I didn't know I was going on this trip. I don't speak Spanish. Fact is, I hadn't even had a chance, with everything we've had going on, I hadn't even had a chance to look at the website. You know, I didn't, all I knew, so I was going blind on faith on this trip. So, you know, something like that could well have happened to me. But what I did know about this trip is I knew that it was to support Global Down Syndrome. And I knew that this trip we were doing something really special, that we were taking Cora Jane on this trip. The Thompson family. See, I've known Cora Jane since before she was born. She's now 10 years old. So I knew that the Thompson family, this was something really special. This was something for Global Down Syndrome. This is for Cora Jane. And so I knew that I had to do this. Right? So we stepped out on faith. And you know what was so amazing about this? Is I think possibly the most amazing thing about this trip is that I got to see Cora Jane as an emissary. I got to see Cora Jane. Cora Jane was a missionary to all of us. And that was what was so amazing. We got there on the trip. It was kind of like I said, we all showed up on this, and it was a church service, one of the first things we did. And we showed up, and here Cora Jane, she just came right up to the front, like she does, and she just started dancing. She was just being herself. Right? She was showing us. We were all there, tentative. All these others, they were there, tentative. We were meeting each other for the first time. And Cora Jane just went out there and she led the way. And all these other kids just started dancing. And I think, you know, for me, she was really a missionary to all of us. In fact, one of the leaders said afterwards, he said, you know, this is exactly what Cora Jane had already made a difference, he said, in this time, because he said the children that were there who don't have Down syndrome and the children with Down syndrome, he says they can be a little tentative to each other, right? And she said that Cora Jane was just so cool. She said all the kids wanted to be like Cora Jane, and these kids are like Cora Jane. And so he said he could tell the difference. He could tell the difference already from her being there. That's called a missionary. And helping how these kids there on the ground were related to each other. You know, afterwards we had a talk at the last, and Jennifer, Cora Jane's mom, she said, you know, I didn't know about Cora Jane on this trip. She doesn't speak Spanish, she says, but she speaks Down syndrome. I tell you what, I asked Jennifer if I could share that, but it was just so powerful. It was such a witness to see all of these together speaking the same language, and then to see and to be a part of something like this school where you see, you know, kids with Down syndrome the world over do not have special programs, do not have schools, do not have support. So you see how this is starting something in a place that doesn't have these resources, that are allowing these children who are already potentially isolated, you know, to come in and work. And I was so proud. I was so happy. I was so pleased. You know, the Thompsons had given us a gift by sharing Cora Jane with us, by sharing this opportunity with us. So, and we're helping babies, man. Man, I tell you what, this was really, it was something else. It was sure enough special. And I came away from this trip feeling like, you know, we're all the same. I learned of this more, that we're all of us the same. You know, Cora Jane's leading the way. Teaching us just to be ourselves, right? But also to realize that that God is not satisfied, right? Until all of these, each of these, has the opportunity, can live in full dignity and worth as created children of God. Actually, I had a picture let me share with you. I thought this was great. I wish I could show pictures of the second service. But look at these girls, and then you can see what's happening. Cora's dancing, and all these girls, they're having a dance party. Is that not something else? This is part of what we enjoy. Which that gets us right down to the lesson, right? Because Jesus says they come and they ask him, he's there at home, and they come and they ask him and they say, your mother and your brothers and your sisters are here to see you. And Jesus says, who are my mother and my brothers and my sister? He says, but the ones, he turns around and he says, you are my mother and my brother and my sisters. He says, because my brother and brothers or sisters are the ones who do the will of God. He said, who are these people? I think this is one of these great times where we see Jesus being fully human, right? Jesus is showing his human side here. We want to think, Jesus is somebody, we put him up on some kind of pedestal, like, he can't even blow his nose. But, the fact is, Jesus was just like you and me. And I think we see this here, don't we, in this lesson? Because he's relating to his family, right? And he's saying, this is not as much my family as these people that I've chosen, right? It's kind of like that saying, I love that saying that your family knows how to push your buttons because they're the ones who install them. Right? And that's true of the family, that's true of your biological family, it's true as well as it's true of our families of choice, it's true of our church family. Right? And so what is Jesus saying here? Jesus is saying that the ones that are my true family are the people that are with me. The ones that are joined together. We're following in God's way. Right? I felt that way. I came back from a trip to Georgia. Julia, we came right to the Wednesday night dinner, and I just thought about this. So Julia made up some fried oak, and I was like, wow. I said, I've got a family. I've got a Georgia family right here in Colorado, right? So this is kind of what this is like. But that's the point. Who are my brother? Who are my mother and my brothers? And I think that's what these trips are all about. It's just like what Nate was saying. We get to see, these people are not so different than us, right? These are people that are sincere. So I went on this trip. Again, I went on this trip, and I didn't know I was going to go. I hadn't prepared for it. I was stepping out on faith. I don't speak Spanish. I thought something like that, the story I shared, might happen to me. I could be embarrassed. Fortunately, I had Ezekiel with me. I wasn't planning to go. Ezekiel wasn't planning to go. We just stepped in at the last minute to fill some spots. It's supposed to be a high school trip. Ezekiel was a seventh grader. But so I was going to take Ezekiel. He's going to be my translator. I thought, okay, this is going to work out. He speaks a little Spanish, right? But guess what? I showed up. Ezekiel didn't need to be my translator. It was so special. We had the leaders of this trip. It's called Hearts to Honduras. Rhonda and Shelton Wicks. They were with us every step of the way. You might have heard that Honduras could be dangerous. It wasn't our experience. They picked us up from the airport. They were with us on every single one of our mission trips. Remember the ones I showed you? They had some students there. Really, just great students who were there to help us as our guides and our translators. Everywhere we went, every single mission experience. I can tell you some of the things. I have a picture. I'll share that picture. We went to, I'd say the first day we went to the orphanage called Copperman. Was that right? Orphanage. And we played with those kids. So I think one of the best things about this trip, we didn't just drop in and see and leave. We were only there 5 days. But we went and we stopped in. Each place we went at least 3 times. So that we could get to know, 5 or 6 different places. And we went each, so we get to know the people by name. If I just dropped in those places the first time and left, I would have had just an impression of it, but we got to know the people. Orphanage at Copperman, we played basketball, or a little bit like volleyball, soccer kids, playing, making tortillas. Y'all saw in the newsletter, pictures, playing with these kids, enjoying the group. We went that night to what they call the Children's Church at Suyapa. This is amazing. This Pastor Carlos, these are kids, dozens of kids who don't have anywhere to go every night. He just gathers these kids to do church. They do the church all the time. These kids, they just come in on the street. A couple of them have parents they're waiting for. Every single one. And he was doing this on the streets. And then this Hearts to Honduras built a building. Amazing. So we went there, I think, 3 different times. We worshiped with this children's church, right? 4 different times. We went the next day. We went to the church. They call it the Alivios Village. Very, very poor community of people that were just poor people living in shacks on the river until they built these little concrete block houses. Still very, very poor, very, very isolated. But they built a church for them. We went and worshiped in that church in the Spirit of God. We went, I think the next day we went to the nutrition center, where the nutrition center, that impacted a lot of people. The nutrition center was children who were orphans, abused, who don't have enough to eat, tiny, tiny babies. I know I could see it. You see pictures of our kids holding these tiny babies, giving them necessary sustenance. All these ministries that this is supported by this Hearts to Honduras. And again, I think what was most important is we didn't just drop in. We stopped in and we got to know them by name, and they got to know us by name. And so we can take this with us. And in fact, I can think of several. I can think of names of people. I can think right now, can you? Of names and faces, right? That I've carried with me, relationships. Facebook's a terrific thing for these kind of things. Relationships I've carried with me. You know, of all of these things, and how it impacted different people, right? We run around, some love the nutrition center, some love the church, some love the orphanage. We all were impacted in different ways. It touched our hearts. I love this model of ministry to help us to see things, to help us to see things with new eyes. And as I shared, one of my favorites, probably my favorite of all, was the children's church at Suyapa. I've never seen anything like it. Again, a church that is just children. These are the children. Little children as little as 3 and 4 years old, wandering in off the streets every night, having church, dancing and singing, getting the skits, doing the prayers, even the preaching. It was so powerful. This Pastor Carlos, I've never seen anything like it. Amazing. You remember the names? You know, that's what I'm thinking about, the names. And, you know, he made the point of teaching them all our names at the beginning so we could call each other by name. And I'm thinking of some that I remember. Jackson. Remember Anna, Karen. These are the older teenagers we got to know. A family of 3 young children. Macy, Adrian, and Brianna. 3 children. Stair-step. They were holding on to us so tight those times. It was just so special. And then for me, I think, you know, these are the children dancing, and I'll share with you something. I was there, and I was so richly blessed, you can't put a price on it. But he called me up, and he said, "No, I want you, Pastor." He says, "I want you to kneel down. And these children are going to come up, and they're going to lay hands on them and pray." You don't see me there. See, these children, I knelt down, and these children laid their hands on me, and they prayed over me, and over this church, and over our ministry. And I knew right then, this wasn't part of my plan, but I knew right then that was exactly right. I'll leave that up there. I'm going to share with you. It reminds me of the story about it was a wealthy father, and he took his son on a trip. He was a wealthy man, and he wanted to take his son on a trip to show him how the poor people lived. And so he went out and he took him out to the country to a farmhouse where there were poor family that he knew, and they stayed the weekend with this poor family so that his son could have this experience. And so then he left, and they were driving back home, and his father said, so how'd you like it? And the boy said, "I liked it, Dad." And he said, "Did you get to see how the poor people live?" The son said, "Yeah." He said, "I did." And so Dad said, "Well, tell me about it. You know, what did you learn?" And the little boy said, "Well, I learned that while we have 1 dog, they have 4. And he said, and I learned that while we have a swimming pool out in the backyard that goes out to the garden, he says, they have a creek that goes on forever and ever. And he said, I learned that while we have electric lanterns out in our garden, he said, they've got all the lights of all the stars in the sky. And he said, I learned that while our patio goes out to the front yard, he says, they look out the front door and they can see the whole horizon. He says, yeah, Dad. He said, thank you for showing me how poor we really are. And I'm not trying to minimize this. You know, I was with Ezekiel. I'm going to close. I was with Ezekiel at the swimming pool the other day, and he was complaining on Saturday about being in the swimming pool. And I said, Ezekiel, you know, I can tell you one thing. I said, all those children you were with last week, you know, I can tell you they're right there where they were, exactly where we left them. He says, they're not in the swimming pool. And see, this is a reminder to be grateful for what it is that we have. But at the same time, I had a night. We were there at that orphanage at Cockney, right? And we were playing ball and we were doing all these things and hanging out with these kids. And I turned to one of these I turned to and said, you know, I could do this every night of my life. Right? So this is the good stuff right here. So that's what these trips are all about, aren't they? That's what these trips are all about. For us to see, just like Nate was saying, just to see, it doesn't matter, you know, what kind of house you live in. What matters is to God. It's like that song we sing, Get Your Picture. Right? We all just have the same heart. Who are my mother and brothers and sisters? But the ones that do the will of God. It doesn't matter if you've been living next to them in your neighborhood for 30 years or if they're people that you just met today. It's about our hearts. This is the message that God has for us. Thanks be to God.